Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Blockchain in Healthcare webinar series. I'm so excited to introduce you to our panelists on today's event, which is on scientific publishing and replicability. Before we do, I wanted to just go through a couple of quick housekeeping remarks. You are in listen-only mode. You don't need to worry about muting your phone. And I would please encourage you to document your questions through the course of the discussion in the GoToWebinar dialog box. We will be taking questioners off of mute during the final segment of audience engagement. So thank you very much. Before we jump into the presentations, maybe we could start with introductions. Dr. van Rossum, would you please begin?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a Director of Special Projects at Digital Science and also the project lead of the Blockchain for Peer Review initiative that we launched a couple of months ago. I have a long history in academic publishing, amongst others. My last role was the Director of Publishing Innovation at Elsevier.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Rajendran.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Rajendran. I'm a professor of neuroscience at the University of Zurich. So I work on understanding the cellular and the molecular basis of Alzheimer's disease. But that's my kind of a day job. But I'm also the founder of ScienceMatters. That ScienceMatters is a science publishing portal that allows publications of scientific observations as opposed to big narratives and stories in science. Pretty similar to Instagram for scientists that would enable peer-to-peer transaction of anything on on research and of research value. And so now we are interested in leveraging blockchain technology. And so we are launching a platform called Eureka Blockchain for science publishing, which will enable both publishing as well as reviewing and also funding.
Oh, can't wait to learn all about it. Thank you. Dr. Mannion.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having us. My name is Sean Mannion. I'm a neuroscientist by training and a former U.S. federal research administrator. I've now stepped into the entrepreneurial realm with a company called Science Distributed, and we are looking to bring blockchain and other emerging technologies to improve science. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Naqvi.
Hi, thanks, Heather. I'm Dr. Naseem Naqvi. I'm the co-founder of the British Blockchain Association and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of British Blockchain Association, which is Europe's first peer-reviewed scientific blockchain journal. I'm also the chair of Research and Education Working Group at Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and I'm pursuing an MSc in blockchain and digital currencies from University of Nicosia. My background is I am a consultant, a neurovascular physician in the United Kingdom, and I'm also an honorary lecturer at the University of Liverpool in the UK. My focus of interest is research in blockchain and how it could help in establishing high-quality evidence-based frameworks.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think let's just quickly comment. You mentioned that you're in the UK, Dr. Naqvi. Where are each of the rest of you right now? Because it's interesting. We're coming together from a number of different cities. Dr. van Rossum?
Yeah, I'm in Blackpool. It's a coastal town near Manchester, northwest of England.
Thank you. Go ahead, others, just quickly.
Based in Amsterdam, Netherlands.
Thank you.
I'm in Zurich, Switzerland.
And Dr. Mannion?
I'm in New York City, the Bronx to be specific.
And I'm in Washington, D.C. So this is a wonderful, wonderful crowd. All right, so just so that everyone is aware, this is the format of the event we're going to be walking through and a little bit about what to expect. And before we get started, we wanted to give our panelists a sense of our audience. So I'm going to ask you to please answer this poll question. And I can see on my side as the organizer, as guests are answering the poll, you should see a little pop-up window. Please give us a sense, describe your role, pick the best option. What role, if any, do you play in scientific publishing? So we're asking whether you are in a publishing capacity specifically, an investigator and peer reviewer, an investigator but who has not conducted peer review activities, or that you're not involved in that field specifically, but you're interested in blockchain and health and life sciences, and you're here to learn. We've got, let's see, we've got just a few more votes to come in. Thank you very much. They're flooding in. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the audience being excellent. So now, panelists, you should be able to see the distribution of our audience. So this is interesting. We have a lot of people here in blockchain and healthcare and life sciences, but not specifically in scientific publishing. So I think this is a terrific opportunity for us to educate our audience about all of the opportunities and the use cases in how to apply blockchain and distributed ledger technologies to advance science and also research about blockchain, like Dr. Naqvi is focused on. Any comments on the distribution of our audience before we jump in?
Very interesting. I think I'm also here to learn, really.
I think it aligns with what I've seen in different events I've been to. There's still more interest from the outside in blockchain for healthcare and science than there is in the inside, and I think that's, you know, one of the values of this is a education and advocacy sort of effort.
Fantastic. All right, so we are now going to go, you'll each have about 7 minutes. I'll be changing presenters after Dr. Naqvi. Dr. Naqvi, you're up, and we can all hide our webcams for a moment while you give your introduction. You've got about 7 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Now, one of the, when we set up our peer-reviewed scientific journal, the idea behind was to establish a database of evidence-based peer-reviewed resources on blockchain to tackle some of the hype that has been created around this new technology. And one of the biggest challenges facing blockchain community right now is how to separate this hype from reality and facts from fiction. And I think the single most effective strategy in dealing with hype created by any new technology is to search for the truth and establish the facts. Now, when you have this new technology, there are always two kinds of people who are very, very passionate about it, creating hype, you know, maximalists we call them. And then on the other spectrum, we have people who are very skeptical. They're just observing from the sidelines, and they're full of doubts. So the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And the ultimate aim of anybody, whether you are interested in learning about the technology, whether you are an educationalist, whether you're an investor or a government official, is to really search for this truth, which lies somewhere in the middle. Now, the question is, how are you going to find it? Now, when I give someone aspirin to treat their stroke, I don't have to create any hype, even though I know that it works. I don't have to exaggerate the effects of aspirin because there is evidence-based resources available to confirm the validity of that decision. So that's the truth. Now, if you search for truth in the blockchain space, or as a matter of fact, in any scientific discipline, there are 3 routes you can take. One is you can take a DIY route, which means that you learn everything yourself, which can be time consuming. You ask somebody who knows, you ask an expert, or you establish the truth by doing research and establish the evidence. Now, the problem with the notion of the experts is that who is really an expert, and how are you going to find them and where they are? It's interesting that Malcolm Gladwell, he's one of the Canadian philosophers, he did some research, and he concluded that approximately 10,000 hours of study and deliberate focused practice can turn anyone into an expert. Now, that's probably debatable, but let's assume that to be true, and you study 3 hours a day for a month. So that's 100 hours. So that's about 1,000 hours a year. And then in 10 years, you will have accumulated 10,000 hours of study. Now, blockchain has not even been around for 10 years. So there are very, very few true experts in this space. So now you're left with the last option, which is to do research and establish facts and evidence. Now, The other problem with these, with the opinions and these narratives is that they sit right at the very bottom of evidence-based ladder. Now, in science, they say one person's expert opinion is another person's nonsense. So what should you do? Now, blockchain and digital currencies, they are scientific disciplines. And traditionally in any scientific discipline, we have a hierarchy of evidence. So you start from anecdotes, opinions, analysis, reviews, and then you go all the way up from case studies to randomized trials to systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And meta-analysis is probably the gold standard and the highest form of evidence to establish the truth in this scientific space. Now, how many meta-analyses have we got in the blockchain space? I don't think there are any. How many systemic reviews we have? I don't think there are any. Double-blind randomized control trials, maybe one or two. Cohort studies, case studies, maybe few. And then there are tons and tons of opinions. So what we need to do now is to move away from proof of concept to proof of impact, which is what I call evidence-based blockchain. Because the concept itself doesn't give you any tangible results. You have to apply those concepts, measure the result of that application, and then see if it made any difference. I shared this recently on LinkedIn as well. The current state of blockchain space is the research in blockchain. There is severe shortage of evidence-based resources. SSRN, which is the Social Sciences Research Network, one of the largest database of research papers, open access. There are about 1 million papers on economics, IT, computer science, finance, technology, etc. And there are only 600 or so papers which are on blockchain, and even fewer research articles. And how many of those are published in scientific peer-reviewed journals? Well, you can count on fingers. Similarly, you have ResearchGate, which is about 15 million researchers, 100 million plus publications. Searching for blockchain returns only 100 odd authors and about 150 publications. So there is severe shortage of evidence-based blockchain resources, and I think we need to. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, and this was the idea behind establishing and setting up this peer-reviewed journal. So this is that's it from me, really.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Naqvi. All right, you can hide your webcam, and now Dr. Rajendran, you're up next, and I'm going to make you presenter right now because I know you had some slides to share.
Just give me 1 sec, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Just trying to. I'm having difficulty here. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Did you click show my screen?
Does it sound good?
There we are. Yep. And if you just put it in presenter mode.
Okay. Awesome.
And your webcam needs to come back.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So do you all see the screen, or like, do you see me?
We see you and the screen. We see you both. And if you want to see yourself, you can click to have your webcam on top, or you can just proceed.
Okay, great. So my name is Lawrence Rajendran, as we discussed before, and the founder of Science Matters. Science Matters is a scientific publishing platform that is basically developed to address some of the three main challenges that we face today. One is that there is a clear barrier to access knowledge, which is what many publishers do, is that when researchers have to publish a paper, then researchers do publish, but at the same time, when the content is published on a publisher's website, then in order to access, if you're from anywhere, then you would have to pay money to access, and this is called the paywalled access. And that's a huge barrier for knowledge creation, at the same time the access to knowledge. And this is why there is a fight in terms of having a fight towards having open access and a free access to scientific knowledge. And many scientific journals are still behind paywall, and as a result, we have problems accessing knowledge. And I think that's a major challenge that we face today. On one hand, you have to, if you're a publisher, you need to have a good business model, but at the same time, we can't have knowledge that is created by research community to be behind a paywall. And the second thing is that there is a lot of data that we accumulate. There's a lot of knowledge that we produce. This is often not communicated. I'll come back to it in a few minutes. And as a result, the estimates are around like 70 to 80% of research data that we find in the lab, like going all the way from ideas to observations to experimental data. Only few of it makes into the public space, which is like the scholarly space in terms of publications. And so there is a lot of knowledge that remains hidden. And the second thing, and then the third thing, which is perhaps the most important thing when it comes to healthcare aspect, is that a large part of the data that we publish, this part is irreproducible, which can go all the way from the fact that this is a very complex phenotype, and as a result you cannot replicate it in a simple manner, or it could also be that people tend to publish only very sensationalizing aspect of it, or publish only one-off experiments, but not enormously statistically validated experiments. And then in the far side of the spectrum, there are also people who patently or blatantly manipulate scientific data in order to present it in the best form, and this can contribute to irreproducibility. And I'll show you some of the reasons for it. And I think when you think about it today, the way when it comes to science publishing today, you cannot publish anymore these observations or observations pertaining confirmatory data or contradictory data. Or if you were to be Alexander Fleming today, who made this fantastic observation that a fungal extract could kill certain bacterial strain, and in order to publish it today, you would need to have enormous amount of resources that can go all the way from having lots of money to lots of expertise and infrastructure, etc., and also lots of time, because today, in order to publish observations, you need to have it in the story context. And if you're this Alexander Fleming, you cannot publish that a fungal strain, you find that it can kill bacteria, but you need to have different aspects in the storytelling process, which would be, what is the mechanism, what's the compound, what is the structure of the compound, and how it acts, as well as whether it cures an animal model of a bacterial disease, etc. And I think this contributes the storytelling aspect that is now a prevalent form of science publishing that enormously retards the progress of science, and scientists, when they make these groundbreaking observations, including me, I'm often forced to keep this data and then develop into a narrative, which only when a narrative is finished, then it's ready for publication. It can take somewhere between 2 to even 10 years to go from making these fantastic observations that can be groundbreaking to the form that can be accepted by publications. As you can imagine, there's longer delays in publishing. This could also retard the progress in science. And as you see here, this is, like as I say, from 1 year to 10 years from making this original observation to publication. That's a long and a windy road. And then there is a huge peer review process, which is often a black box, where the scientific data is sent to peers in the field, and most of the times in a single blind manner. They would know where who the authors of the paper are, but the authors wouldn't know who the reviewers are. And as a result, there could be a lot of nasty comments and then back and forth, and this also retards this field. And as I said, this the other aspect of publishing these, that there's so many problems in publishing, also contributes to irreproducibility. There are retractions, for example, when a paper cannot be replicated, it also if it is about fraudulence, then it gets retracted, and we see that this is also in rise. Around estimates are even in the well-established fields, around 2 to 3, 33%, 66% of the published research is not reproducible by others. And I think I come back to this. I think one of the major problems with this irreproducibility is that we are not allowed to publish what we find, but we have to somehow massage it, somehow embellish it, and we have to present it in a form. We have to prune the narrative in a way that the storytelling the story is sensational and sexy. And we are often discouraged from publishing negative data. We are often discouraged from publishing confirmatory data or contradictory data. Only positive studies are published. As a result, when it's about a drug target or a drug, then it's only these positive studies that are published. And when it comes to clinical validation, then often these drugs that are based on these targets, they often fail because we never could publish these negative data. And as I said, so this is why I think we need to have a technology that would allow us to publish almost all of these data that pertain to observation, that can go from orphan observations, single observations, negative observations, to positive and confirmatory observation. And that's exactly what we try to do. And today, as you can see here, when an author tries to publish, there's a lot of these hurdles exist, and something like 10 billion per year goes into just publishing. But we still, in this process, we still have problems in terms of in terms of having this efficiency. And this is why Science Matters is now trying to leverage blockchain technology to facilitate this peer-to-peer, the peer-to-peer transaction of research value that can all go from having ideas, micro contributions, publishing observations, to even funding these ideas in a platform. And we call this as the Eureka blockchain solution platform that would allow authors now to immediately publish observation as they make these observations, as a scientist has an idea or makes this observation that similar to Alexander Fleming's observation. Now you don't have to wait for 10 years, but you could immediately publish on Science Matters Eureka publishing portal. It gets timestamped, and as soon as it's timestamped, it's also sent to peer reviewers, and the peer reviewers through smart contracts, they would evaluate this, and they also get paid. And once the peer reviewing is done, these observations or these the publications on Science Matters Eureka blockchain also receive the score. And this is already enough. We don't need an additional level of journals. And now, depending on the scores, funding agencies can fund these projects. So we think in this way, we kind of restructure science publishing that takes a long time and inefficient, and it has this irreproducibility. Now, by bringing these droplets of data, bringing these observations, and then efficiently publishing in this platform, we can make the scientific publishing process much more efficient.
My goodness, this is just such an inspiring vision. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajendran. Okay, so Dr. Mannion is up next, and Dr. Mannion, I'm going to make you presenter, and you can drop off of webcam for the moment, Dr. Rajendran. Thank you so much.
Okay. On my screen. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are good. Just need to put it in presentation mode. Thanks, Dr. Mannion.
Excellent. Okay, my name is Sean Mannion. I am from Science Distributed. We are interested broadly in what blockchain and emerging technology can do in an open science framework of bringing scientists together. I think I want to start with what the problem is. When we talk about blockchain, a lot of people say, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And for science and blockchain, I think there's different stakeholders, so there's different problems. I think scientists want better science. 20% of US health science research can't be replicated. That's a problem. If 20% of the time your car doesn't start, 20% of your groceries you bring home from the store are bad, or 20% of the time you don't get a paycheck, that's a problem. So I would say that for scientists, that's an issue, especially even if it's not your own science, you might be referencing science that's just not replicable. For the funders, for the agencies that fund science, and I used to work for the Department of Defense, so I know this well, the decreasing return on investment and money spent on bad science is a problem. $30 billion in US health science is not replicable. That's approximately the NIH extramural budget annually. If you said we could double the NIH budget next year by just making science more reproducible, I think that would be a win for everybody. But it's definitely a problem for the funders that this science is not replicable. And faster miracles, which is getting from bench to bedside faster, I think that's indirectly tied to replicability in science, but I think administratively, Health and Human Services is already looking at what blockchain can do for some of the administrative speed up. So some other people who are taking care of that problem, it's in very good hands. But with regard to the value proposition for science publishing, I think that the replication issue is one where we want to look and see if blockchain is a solution. Right now, I don't know. I'm a scientist and I ask lots of questions rather than give answers straight away. Here's a lot of the questions that I'm asking and others should be asking, looking across the different steps involved in science, from forming hypotheses all the way out to publishing, presenting. Some broad questions about this is what can be done to improve in each area. I think that's not simply a blockchain question, but relates to a variety of different solutions. Can blockchain or distributed ledger technology facilitate or incentivize these changes? I think a lot of the times people think about it in either or. We don't need blockchain to do this. Well, okay, but if it's not being done, does blockchain add a new layer that allows us to incentivize these changes? What's the cost benefit of implementation is another area that needs to be looked at. If it would cost too much and benefit you too little, it's not worth implementing. But if there are things that can be achieved without blockchain, why aren't they being done? And maybe even having a conversation about what blockchain can do in different aspects of science is a way to force that discussion. Focusing on publishing today, what can be done with blockchain in publishing? I think you're hearing from some of the other speakers. Some of these questions can get you thinking about that, and I think the scientists, not just the technologists, need to be thinking about that. For me, one of the biggest ones is can we crowdsource peer review? We could do that right now, but there's not a structure and incentive system to do that. Right now, we have a small handful of reviewers that look at every paper, and that puts a lot of our biases in one basket. So can we spread that out a little bit, distribute the bias, distribute the work, speed it up, and have a more reliable peer review? I think that's one area we should be looking at. Looking at different publishing opportunities, again, what can we do for the incentives, not just of publications, but for the reviewers? What can we do within peer review? Is crowdsourcing feasible? What can we do in capturing some of the black boxes, as Lawrence put it, of comments and edits? And can this be condensed and done not quite in real time, but in condensed time, speeding up the process of publication? And finally, in a publication record, right now we have a go, no go. If something's published, it's met peer review criteria. If it's not published, then it hasn't. And that's usually the threshold of what people pay attention to in science. That's a really simplistic way of looking at confidence levels of what the data show us. Can we set up something more granular? Impact scores an attempt to do that, but it buckets everything by journal. Can we do that study by study within the peer review? And I think that we can, and we're going to try putting together a pilot. DARPA is very interested in this, and so they're looking for systematized confidence in open research and evidence, and we're going to try and develop a weighted crowdsourced peer review of published and pre-published material outside of the normal peer review to do a compare and contrast and see if we can give it a confidence score that has more reliability, speed, and granularity. We're partnering with Blockchain in Healthcare Global and Consensus and some advisors from different areas, putting together the full proposal now. So if anybody is interested in doing something like this, especially those in academia or open science, please contact me. My email is at the bottom of the page here. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Heather.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mannion. I love the structure you provided to that. Okay, so our next presenter is Dr. Van Rossum. I'm going to make you presenter, Doctor, and you can show your webcam and then show your screen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is my screen visible?
It is, yep.
Fantastic, okay.
Perfect.
So I just wanted to start first with a short description on how blockchain is applicable in scholarly communication and research in general. I think there are three levels. Some companies, some initiatives suggest a token for scientists that can be provided when they provide certain services, for example, doing peer review. And with these tokens, the scientists could then purchase other services or even pay for their open access fees. So in that way, you would create an economy around science, solving some of the motivational issues we have today. Blockchain is also proposed as a digital rights management system, making things like rights, permissions, royalty payments much easier, but also being able to introduce an alternative to the current business models that are dominant, which is open access and subscription fees, which are both coming with their disadvantages. So micropayments, for example, would be something that could be implemented using the blockchain. And the third, and I think that's personally the most interesting one, is that the blockchain allows us to share and store data in a different way, namely decentralized, so meaning we don't need a middleman, let alone a commercial middleman, to store the data of research. And I think that's personally one of the most interesting aspects. I want to start with a problem, because I think that's one of the previous speakers said. I think that's a very good principle. Let's start with a problem we tried to solve, and a peer review came up earlier as a large problem, and we agree with that. There are four problems that were briefly mentioned already. A difficulty in identifying and finding suitable reviewers. There's an increased pressure on existing reviewers to do more review work. That leads, of course, to delayed times, to long publication times, and is increasingly so. To an extent, it has to do with a lack of review recognition. It's a legacy system that researchers are being rewarded based on the number of citations and number of publications. But as we all know, there are many other things that researchers do that are valuable, but simply these are not captured. There is cases of fraud and manipulation, and then overall there is a lack of transparency. Peer review is really the cornerstone of scholarly communication, but it's a very opaque process, and that leads to a lack of trust in the process. So how do we solve that? Some of the previous speakers spoke about completely redesigning the process. What we actually propose in our initiative is something more down to earth. It's basically we should start with sharing the information. Again, peer review is an opaque process. What happens is not really communicated to the outside world. And to an extent, there are good reasons to do that. There is single blind, double blind, and we believe there are good reasons to have those processes. But at the same time, we have to be more open. We have to, as an ecosystem, start to share information around peer review, because we could solve many of the issues we discussed before. If we have an independent third-party place where we store this information, and a trustworthy place, then we can actually independently verify that review actually took place. We don't only have to trust the publisher, but there is a way to verify that the process took place. We can also build better review refining tools. Now publishers rely on their own data, but of course that's incomplete, because reviewers will review for multiple journals, multiple publishers. And the moment we have that collected in one data store, we can create better tools. And also, for example, prevent fraud by sharing information around suspicious reviewers, for example. Very importantly, we could start to properly recognize reviewers for their work. Recognition starts with collecting the data, and once we start to share that information about what reviewers did what review, we can properly recognize them. And last but not least, with being more open, with sharing information, with increasing the transparency, we can increase the trust in the process. So again, we don't want to redesign the process. There are good reasons to keep the things as they are, because the process works, but there are challenges, and we believe that by sharing the information in a responsible way, we'll address most of these challenges. So why blockchain? Well, the big challenge in sharing information is trust. There is, and it's a very delicate matter in peer review, there is the trust between the reviewer, the editor, and the author. The author will often not know the reviewer. The editor sits in the middle. There is the trust between the publication and the reader, and there is of course the trust between the publishers. So it's a very delicate balance that requires really a sophisticated solution. And this is really where the blockchain comes in, because this is a very natural technology when you think about the challenges. First of all, it's a decentralized. It allows us to create a decentralized data store, which means there is no single owner or a single middleman, let alone a commercial middleman. So in that way, parties and publishers will be more convinced and more inclined to share the information. It's a distributed data store, so everybody can host a copy of the data store, which of course increases safety. But also, very importantly, especially around peer review, it's a transparent data store, but it's pseudonymous. So we can be completely open about and transparent about the review process, but we don't have to reveal the real identities. And of course, that's a crucial aspect when you think about single and double blind peer review. So how does this work? Basically, we don't want to give the researchers another job to do, another platform they have to log into. So we will collect the information around peer review process. So again, that's really information around who was invited, who accepted, and what was the recommendation of the reviewer. We will collect that from the submission systems, and we will store that on the blockchain. And the system is going to be quite safe. So again, what we're going to store on the blockchain is links. Relations basically between reviewers, authors, recommendations, and journals. And the essence is that if you have access to the right system, so if, for example, you as a reviewer have access to ORCID, you can look at the information behind those links. So basically, having access to the right platforms will give you the relevant information that pertains to your activity. So also the publishers will only see their information. Again, one big transparent database storing all the relations, but only have access to the data if you're entitled to do so. What does it will lead to? Basically, again, review process, it's crucial. It's crucial to publishers. It's crucial to many players. We want to create a central data store, a trusted data store of review process that all the participants in the ecosystem can have access to, but again, only have access to the information that they are entitled to, and makes it a very safe and very trustworthy way to share information, and really hopefully solve the many challenges around peer review, which are really quite pressing by applying this technology. So something about the organization. So we launched this initiative, Digital Science, together with 3 publishers, Springer Nature, Taylor & Francis, and Cambridge University Press. We are also partnered with ORCID, and Catalysis is the company in Amsterdam that's building application. It's going to be a non-for-profit organization. So again, the information is going to be owned by the community. It's going to be a private blockchain with many publishers joining. Phase 1 is going to be released in September, October. So we want to have the first actual working system ready then. And then from phase 2, that's October, November, we hope to invite many other publishers joining this initiative. Again, really hoping to be the trustworthy hub storing the information of this crucial process in research communication. Thank you very much. We also published a report on blockchain and scholarly communication. It was published in November, which is ages ago in terms of the developments of blockchain, but I think still relevant, and basically describing all the potential use cases of this technology in scholarly communication and research in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so the rest of us can come back on webcam to begin our discussion. And by the way, your research paper, Blockchain for Research, was one that I read with great enthusiasm the moment it was released. And thanks, I believe, to Dr. Mannion, who pointed me to it. And then we talked about it a great deal, and it was a great piece that really provided a lot of fuel to this industry.
Thank you.
So I think that one of the really wonderful things about this topic is how quickly it is evolving, and how much transformative potential exists across all of the projects that you've discussed. the first thing that comes to my mind is the synergistic quality of the initiatives that were just under discussion, and I can't help but comment on the opportunity for collaboration among us here is incredible. I'd love to hear thoughts from any of you. I don't want to be prescriptive about who would comment on that first, but I imagine I'm not the only one that occurred to as you were all listening to one another's presentations.
Yeah, maybe I can start.
Sure.
Yeah, I think definitely there is a lot of opportunity to collaborate. I think maybe you've seen the announcement that Science Root is now collaborating with Artifacts, to create initiatives that were launched the last couple of months. At the same time, I think there are different models how this could work out. The initiative I just described is really existing players in the industry trying to improve their services by applying this new technology, and some of them will be more disruptive. For example, Science Root is trying to basically disintermediate the publishers. So I think, yes, there's collaboration, but there are also different models, and we have to see what model will in the end succeed.
Good point. Dr. Rajendran, it looked like you wanted to jump in.
No, I think Joris is absolutely right. I think we are so early in this phase that there's no other option other than to collaborate, because I think we can understand and learn from each other. ScienceMatters is now, we launched this Eureka as a platform which would enable people to also collaborate, and we are now in discussions with different platforms, including DAPE, for example, whether this is a possibility to collaborate in terms of tokenizing funding models, right? So we are mostly in publishing single observations and ideas and micro attributions, but at the same time, I think what Joris described is also very interesting. So maybe we could collaborate on peer review aspect with them instead of just reinventing different parts of the world. We should be able to creatively collaborate. I agree with you.
I think there is a need. I think there is a very strong need to have a global network of scholars in blockchain. I'm very passionate about it. If you go on LinkedIn, you see, you search for hashtag scholars in blockchain, you'll see lots of posts from me. I think blockchain is very decentralized. We are in different parts of the world trying to achieve the same thing. So I agree with Lawrence and Joris. Better to pool resources together, think tanks, intellectual sort of contribution, and work together, yes, as a network.
And I would agree with that. I think that the development of standards, even earlier than that, the brainstorming of where this can apply works better if you're talking across all of these groups. I've had the chance to talk to Joris, and I think I'm in agreement with him that we need to start with some baby steps. I know what DARPA wants. DARPA always wants something that's advancing things much further. So we're trying to give them a broader vision of what can happen in parallel to sort of refine that confidence level. But I think that all of these efforts and others, I'm tracking probably close to 15 different efforts of science and blockchain right now. Obviously I'm focused on the health sciences, and there's some clinical blockchain folks who are doing some work as well. But there's not a lot of people focused on this yet. Publishing seems to be one of the hot topics, though. So I think that getting our head around where we can apply this, how it can be applied, what's the cost benefit, as Naseem said, making sure we're doing studies to look at comparative, what's the benefit, and is that provable, or is that demonstrable through some sort of study that we can look side by side with the traditional peer review versus a new model like digital science is setting up. I think those things will be critical, because the more data we can have to demonstrate the value, the easier it'll be to bring other people into it.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of bringing others into it, one of the things that was a common theme among all of your work was looking at distorted and broken incentive models for the wide arc of behaviors and activities from all the way from hypotheses through publication and citation and so on. I'm super interested in, let's talk a little bit about how we might run experiments that involve applied behavioral economics and game theory, and determine whether or not these experiments are in fact having the desired result. So I've been talking a lot about needing to approach the notion of intervening in broken incentive models as experiments. It's a new kind of intervention into health and life sciences that we need to validate just as we would other categories. But we haven't really had much of an experimental mind when approaching that problem so far. But all of you touched on it. I'd love to hear thoughts on how you view that being approached under the context of your specific initiatives, and what that might look like in a little more detail. Who'd like to speak to that first?
Yeah, I'll comment on that. I think if you look at the initiatives, the new projects, new ideas, where they are coming from, they're coming from right now largely from these blockchain startups background, people who are doing their small pilots, startups, venture capitalists, and all that. And obviously there's a lot of academic involvement. So I think one way to look at it is by encouraging those people and those startups to write a scientific paper, or at least try and attempt to write something. So not just a white paper, which is just a business proposal of how you go about doing things, but a scientific paper. So write two papers. So a white paper and a yellow paper. So yellow paper is the scientific technical paper, right? And white paper is the business part of things. So write a yellow paper and explain what questions you are trying to answer, as Sean said earlier. What is the problem? How will you measure the results? How would you define success? And also, very, very important, as Lauren said, what if you do not achieve those outcomes? So if your project has failed, people should know, because that's how we learn. We learn from negative studies as well. So when something didn't work, or if your attempt was unsuccessful, then it's a very, very useful resource. So do not discard those findings. Publish it, disseminate it, distribute it, so others can learn from it.
Maybe I can.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, just something about the incentives and motivational challenges that we have in science. I think it's to a large extent, and I'm curious what the other panelists say. It's quite clear. It is basically the currency of motivation, or is reputation. That's what science is about. And the problem with the broken model now is that reputation is also only based basically on two things: the number of citations, the number of publications. And that has to do with the legacy print model, that things only become public after they're published. And I think the interesting aspect of the blockchain is that it allows us to capture many more moments that was discussed earlier in the publication process. And having more things that we capture increases the reproducibility, but it also allows us to create better and more balanced metrics, for example. So I think again, it's all about reputation, and reputation starts with gathering the data about research activities outside of the publications and citations, and the blockchain can be instrumental there.
So you're thinking about, as we're talking about token economies and incentives, that tokenizing reputation and accumulating and having checks and balances with reputational attestations is as important as potential fundraising or financial remuneration. Is that a...
Well, even more basic than that. You don't even have to think about tokens. You only have to think about capturing information about what researchers have done, and being much more broad on what steps in the process you capture. And the current model of databases, the proprietary nature of databases, restricts us in being able to collect information from many more activities, from many more researchers. So the whole decentralized nature of blockchains allows us to have a real shared, very broad platform capturing many more events. And again, capturing the events can lead again to better metrics. So I think it's even more basic than tokenization.
Understand, Dr. Rajendran. Yes.
Hi, if I may comment, as a practicing scientist. So I have I do research in the lab, and I have around 10 people, ranging from master students to postdocs in the lab. And one of the incentives for me as a researcher, or like, if you're a professor or if you're a postdoc who want to get a professorship, or if you're a professor and you want to have grants in the field from scientific foundations, then you need publications, right? Not necessarily citations, but you really need publications. And these publications, it needs to be in one of these high impact publications that we call it. There are like several, there are a few names that we all understand. These are these hallmark journals. As soon as you would get a paper there, then this is like a sure shot that the next career move would be done. And so the incentives are pretty well aligned, and we know exactly what we need to achieve in order to get to this incentive. So and one of the main things is that if you have a paper in these in these journals, then you can you advance in your career. And so what is necessary for publishing there? It's not these observations, it's not these fantastic findings, but it is this absolute narratives. These are important narratives. If you look at the structure of these papers that are published today, it is not single figure that we used to publish in Nature or Science 30, 50 years ago. These are bigger narratives, and that you have to tell a sensationalizing, you need to tell a sexy story that would end up in a way in tabloid, etc. So this is what, and as a result, what if my lab, we have around, let's say, even if we publish only the top 5% of all the observations that we make, if you make a Gaussian distribution of the observations that we make in the lab or experimental findings, the top 5%, if I publish just that, then this is already enough for the next career strategy. So you get grants, the incentives aligned for just publishing the top 5% or top 10% of these observations. This is already very good. And so one needs to ask the question, if this is the incentive, right, and if this is what I get, why would I bother publishing the rest of the 80% or the 90% negative data, something data that could be useful for others? And if I have nothing, if there are no incentives for publishing this 90% of the data, the droplets of data that we call, why would I publish? And I think that's what blockchain would enable now. As soon as you make these observations and then you put it in a decentralized way, and then there is an organic way to have reputation associated with these observations. Or let's say, for example, as you contribute a negative data, and that helps finding a drug better or validating a drug, then you get some incentives back. I think this will change the way we do science, and it will also change the way the time that it'll take to validate drug candidates and replicability and reproducibility in observation. So I think the current model of publishing definitely is too slow and inefficient. Perhaps with blockchain on the publishing side, we could enhance both at the level of communicating at the very early stage, at the same time for reproducibility.
Well, before we move on, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Quick. I think what I'm hearing here is definitely there's a multi-layered incentive system within science. Your monetary, your career track, or your reputation. And I think there's an intrinsic motivation to many scientists, especially young scientists, to just do something good and to find the truth. But mapping these incentives and then finding out how they align with the goals of the funders, so that you're bringing across the two stakeholder groups, so that you've got your incentives aligned with the goals of the funders, be that a nonprofit that wants to solve a disease, find cures for a disease, or a government funding agency that wants to both drive the economy and improve health overall. I think that would be a great first step for any type of consortium or group to start thinking about what are the incentive structures already out there, where has it become misaligned or outscaled its utility, or drop it below a certain threshold that gives us this 20% of irreproducible science. And that type of mapping or environmental scan could be huge in setting up the right, be it token model or system around how to improve science.
Yeah, so there was an anecdote that you described, I think it was Dr. Rajendran, during your talk about how Fleming's discovery of penicillin would not have been publishable today. And I think it would be really interesting, because if we remember, our audience doesn't come from they're healthcare and blockchain, but they're not from science. So they may really not understand why in detail. And it's a very jarring thought to think that a discovery of that magnitude, if made today, would face barriers that are totally unknown to the population at large that's depending on the advancement of science and medicine and all of these things, to realize that there are real barriers, real problems to solve. Maybe we could talk across the panelists with our good scientist Fleming as the example, and the discovery of penicillin as the situation, and say, if that had occurred today, why? And we could talk about the different areas that you each focus on. Why would there be such problems, and how would it be different in a scenario where, for example, the Eureka blockchain had manifested and blockchain for peer review was thriving, and all scientists had ORCID IDs, and the field of research about blockchain was burgeoning, as you've described, Dr. Naqvi. But I think using that as such an example will help us anchor for our audience why this is dire. The replicability and reproducibility challenges are literally dire, and when we're in situations that massive discoveries are actually slowed by an empirical process that's supposed to be accomplishing something other than what it is. Who'd like to go on that first? I know I just think the Fleming penicillin example is such a great thing for us to use as a lens.
I mean, you know, this is something that I often tell people, that today, if you really make these kind of groundbreaking observations, right, and you send it to a journal, because this is what the incentive is. If you're a researcher, it's not necessarily important. It's not any more important that you make the discovery, but you have to publish that discovery. So you need to communicate in a format of a paper, and that's the currency for all your career. And when you think about it, and today you make such a groundbreaking observation, and let's say it's very pertinent for Alzheimer's disease, right? You can't publish that observation anymore. And the reason is that you need, in the peer review process, in order to get that observation into a paper format today, it means it's largely based on stories, and you need to have several aspects, and you need to bring into context, and also you need to address many different questions. And I tell you, if you take an example, if you were to be Alexander Fleming today, and you publish, and he publishes 1928 Journal of Bacteriology, there's this paper in 1928 describing essentially what is a single observation. He characterized very well what the structure, what the characteristics of the fungus is, and what's the characteristics of the bacteria is, and that actually equals. But if you submit to a journal today, an academic journal today, you will for sure you will get questions like, that sounds very, very interesting, but it's very preliminary, because the authors don't know what is the compound in the fungal extract that does this, and what is the mechanism through which this happens, and what is the structure of it. And if you aim for a very high journal, which is like, you know, very high impact journal, you might even have to cure half a population of Africa today in order to get that paper. And it might sound silly, but you know, this really happens all the time. We are expected to cure Alzheimer's disease in every single paper that discusses about the nature of Alzheimer's or a phenotype of it. And you often see that the peer review process also demands the peer review is not installed anymore to validate whether the authors say, whatever the authors say, is it correct. But now we have these extensions. Can you demonstrate that this works in the mouse model? Does it work in what is the mechanism? What's the structure? And penicillin was not even isolated in the original paper that Fleming published. It was called penicillin, but it was actually an extract. And it would take him another year to isolate penicillin. It would take them several years to synthesize the synthetic penicillin, and it will take them, I think, 10 years to solve the structure, and 40 years to solve the mechanism of penicillin, how it acts, right? So imagine if it were to be today that you're demanded the entire storyline to be published right away. That blocks science. Science becomes closed. science becomes enormously slow. And I think, imagine the way that it is a collaborative publishing. As soon as an author, as soon as a researcher identifies and puts it on a blockchain, and there is a credit that there's accreditation, people know that this is from this person, and then you can have these extension, the blocks of information that is done either by the authors or by others. And this is what we try to do in Science Matters, where we could do this collaborative narrative together in real time, as opposed to demanding from the beginning, right? And if it is open, it's decentralized and distributed, I think this will make it much more faster. So that's there you have it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'd love if Dr. van Rossum, maybe you could comment on the peer-reviewed specific elements that Dr. Rajendran was just describing, and what that would be like, and how you're addressing it in your model.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Another example is Einstein's famous article. It would probably not have published in these times either. I mean, I think it's the same example. I think to an extent it also has to do with the fact that science becomes big science, as they call it. So it became a profession. It's not amateurs anymore that do science. It's become massive. So with the move from small science to big science, you need to formalize things. You have to come up with metrics. You have to quantify science. So I think a lot of the problems that we see have to do with that. I mean, you have to have a measure. And the measure became citations and publications. And whenever you install a metric, people will misuse the system, and people will move towards the. So I think to an extent it also has to do simply with that science became much more professional over the decades. So I think that's very important. But I agree with Lawrence. I think absolutely, the moment people are able, that the threshold for publication becomes much lower. And people indeed don't have to have the complete picture before they publish. I think will definitely really advance science in that respect.
So, I just want to make one comment. I just want to make one comment for our audience who are not actually deeply involved in blockchain, but just looking at it from outside and trying to test and trying to learn about it. Just one comment. Look, blockchain is not a test of accuracy. You can validate data. The quality of data and the quality of communication that you put on the blockchain is only as good as the quality that you put on it. If you put false, inaccurate, biased data on the blockchain, it doesn't make it true, but actually it makes it worse. Now it's immutably false. Okay. It's now immutably false. Okay, it's immutably incorrect. So I think people who are trying to understand blockchain in terms of research and scholarly publication, please don't forget the basics, which is good quality is good quality everywhere in the world, whether it's on the blockchain, whether it's off the blockchain, and poor quality is poor quality everywhere, whether it's on the blockchain or off the blockchain.
And I agree 100%. Garbage is garbage, and you have to be careful. But I think one of the values blockchain brings, and this gets more past peer review to the actual data, is the auditability. A recent study came out, and I forget the name, so forgive me. But if more scientific data was audited, and they were looking at a sample of like 2%, you would have a 50% reduction in the irreproducibility, because people know their work is going to get checked. They're going to be a little more careful. That auditability, I think, is another grand future of where we can go in 10 to 15 years, but we're not there yet. I think early on, Joris, I think you hit the nail on the head. Science has scaled past its current structures and incentive systems. The safeguards of the journals to keep out nonsense is now inhibiting rapid movement with all of the science being done. But you open up those safeguards and you just get a ton of noise. I mean, for every penicillin, you're going to get 9 million garbage penicillins that people just want to make a quick buck off of and roll out. So how do you balance that? I think you need to systematically study it and then incrementally change those incentive structures and those safeguards so that they can deal with a higher capacity. And that scaling, I think, is what has put us in this situation.
So you touched on something. I want to talk about this point that several of you have made around how we have this opportunity to intervene in distorted and broken incentive models. And the point that I'm making is that those need to be run as experiments. What about IRBs? Who is going to oversee the experiments where we are studying new behavioral economic interventions and game theory applications in scientific incentive distortion. So some thoughts on that. How would we actually empirically model these new approaches to addressing the distorted incentives? And how would we know definitively, how could we make that part of the lexicon, part of the body of knowledge? Thoughts?
Well, I would start with, and I'm already trying to do this, bring the regulators in, showing them the value of this technology at an administrative level. At an administrative level, away from science, it can do wonderful things. GSA, General Services Administration, a U.S. federal department, ran a pilot last year where they just did vendor proposal review. And they reduced time and cost by 90% by layering a blockchain across 22 legacy systems. The genius of that, I'll call him that, Jose Arrieta, is now at Health and Human Services and looking to see how it can apply in that realm administratively. I think we need to teach the regulators, teach the health regulators what this can do for them with an IRB audit. Imagine all of the time they could save, the energy they could save, and then once they're comfortable with the value of the technology in a completely administrative way, they'll be more amenable to seeing how we can test different types of applications. We can study the scientists, study ourselves from a token economic standpoint, and give tokens to two different groups and see how they use them and where you get improvements in speed, access, and quality of research. But I think bringing everybody in, especially the regulators, to the value of this administratively is a great first step to speed all that up.
Other comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think start with the small studies, show to the world that it works. It has its limitations, but it has some good points, some not so good points. What are the limitations? How do we go about it? And then, as Sean said, regulators need to be educated as well. And in terms of token economies, I think it's important to understand that it's not just monetary incentives. We are talking about social capital here, not just the monetary sort of side of things. Because when you do a research and article receives credit, for example, for citation, it's the journal that gets the impact factor, not the authors. So I think blockchain could offer a solution to this problem in terms of giving credit to the researchers in real time in a tamper-proof way on the blockchain. And also, similarly, we have no clear mechanism for recognizing the acknowledgement, the input of the reviewers, the effort that they spend both qualitatively and quantitatively. They are often poorly valued. So I think if we can show through small studies, pilot studies, projects, there are advantages, but certain limitations. Put a balanced view, in front of them. I think they will be more open to it. But as Sean said, I think education is paramount. It's a new technology. There's a lot of hype. People are not clear how it is going to work out. So I think education is the key here.
So it's interesting. That's let's move to the technology a little bit here. Though the topic of meta science and science studying itself is incredibly fascinating and a great topic, I'd love to get into a little bit some of the projects. I know Dr. Naqvi, you're looking at it broadly and receiving publications about this work. Dr. Mannion, you've been looking widely at the ideal approaches to address some of your challenges. Dr. van Rossum and Dr. Rajendran each have technical projects in various stages. So let's talk about those two technical projects a little bit, and I'd love to understand their architecture and approach. And maybe we could start there, getting to where are you in a project life cycle? How far along? What are some of your next major milestones? And maybe you could begin, Dr. van Rossum.
Yeah, so I think I briefly discussed let's say the high-level architecture of how it works. We hope actually to deliver something in September, and every time I meet the technical team, I look in their eyes and I see if they still show confidence in that deadline. But surprisingly, they still do. So actually, we hope to release the first prototype in September. What it will do is basically have about 45 journals capture the review information, We'll have also a queryable database where we can validate some information. We can look on the status of review. We can see what reviewers have done, anonymized if needed. So actually, we're quite confident to have something, I think, especially when you look at blockchain, something really fast. And I think very important to note here is that blockchain sounds very daunting. And of course, we know all the challenges that Bitcoin has in terms of mining and energy consumption. But again, when you think about a private blockchain with trusted parties and a functionality which is, for example, what we described on storing the relations between elements of peer review, it doesn't have to be so complex. And actually, the whole assumption, the whole reason why we started this project is because we think that blockchain, again, the main question is, can we do this without blockchain? And in principle, you could have a system that we describe without blockchain, but it will be more expensive. It would need a lot of people, a lot of ways to increase trust. And our assumption is blockchain is the natural technology for this, and it means that it should be developed relatively fast and relatively cheap. So we're still confident that we'll have something to show in a few months from now.
Could you speak, before we get into your project, Dr. Rajendran, could you speak to what technology, what blockchain or distributed ledger technology you're building on, and whether or not it's token dependent, and how you will be permissioning new participants into your consortia or network?
Very briefly, so this is there's an Ethereum-based platform. It's
I'm sorry, Dr. Rajendran. I meant that question for Dr. van Rossum, and then I will be coming back to you next on your platform. One moment, Dr. van Rossum, just if you could speak to those things about your project, just quickly.
Yeah, so it's Ethermint based. So it's
Quorum?
we.
Are you using like Quorum, or are you using the sidechain or public Ethereum, the mainnet, or what part of the Ethereum?
We're using Ethermint, so we're using basically Ethereum, but then proof of not proof of work, but proof of stake.
Mm-hmm.
And
proof of work.
Not proof of work. No.
No, I said proof of worth.
Yes.
Worth. You mean? Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And in terms of new participants, we're hoping to actually scale up with the number of publishers quite soon after phase 1. So we're actually already inviting new publishers to join, and they will be hopefully again taken that phase 1 will be completed successfully. Of course, again, we're talking about an experiment and a pilot, so of course there are no guarantees. But again, if our assumptions are correct, and again, how do we test that? But basically, faster publication times, happier editors, happier reviewers. I mean, I think that's quite straightforward ways to test the success of the platform. Then we will be scaling up and adding more publishers aggressively after phase 1.
Terrific. Thank you, Dr. van Rossum. Okay, Dr. Rajendran, I would love to know all about. Tell us about the technology architecture and the project, where you are in the life cycle of the project, and for Eureka blockchain.
Thank you. So ScienceMatters exists without the blockchain. So we've been operational for the last 3.5 years, and where even without blockchain, people can publish these observations, and this get peer reviewed, and it gets published. But with blockchain, so this is what we try to do now, is on the Eureka blockchain, one could immediately timestamp these observations and then publish in this decentralized way. So we use again Ethereum-based blockchain, and the tokens that we use is ERC20 combined with ERC 667 and 865, which would enable aspects of having smart contracts to pay the peer reviewers, and also get paid if you're a cited author. For example, if your paper gets cited, you're not anymore just given a single line in the references, but if a paper gets replicated or it gets cited, one could also get these tokens as remuneration.
Fantastic.
This is why in the industry we also try to build some kind of reputation score for the authors, but also the fact that these observations or these studies can be replicated. There is also an incentive for people to publish these replicating observations, because the author who's study gets replicated gets some tokens back. At the same time, somebody who publishes aspects on replication, be it positively replicating or negatively replicating, these authors also get some tokens. In this way, we try to develop or try to visualize networks of observations that have replication scores. So if it's a Fleming's work, then if you could replicate in many different, if it's exactly the replication, then Fleming would get some Eureka tokens, but at the same time, you also get Eureka tokens if you, we are trying to implement a different kind of incentive scheme that if you cannot replicate the original author's work, then you still get some Eureka tokens, but the author does not get Eureka tokens because the author has not thought about these experiments, have not published or published something which is not replicable. So in this way, you would have negative score of the observation as soon as you have something that is not replicated. But if it's replicated, then you also have a kind of a positive score. And in this way, we could look at scientific data. Just imagine in the Eureka platform, you could just say, so what are the drug targets for Alzheimer's disease? Then it will pop up not necessarily just these verbose way that we look at it in PubMed or in Google that says, okay, these are these studies. But what we are trying to do with the Eureka platform is really to have these visualized networks that give also information about who has published it, what's the study, and how much of it is replicated, and how much of these replicated studies are positive, and how much of these are not necessarily negative in the negative context, but more like something that had failed to replicate. And we need these droplets of data in terms of networks. So we basically use Ethereum, but we're also trying to now think about different aspects. We are open, but for our purposes, Ethereum-based blockchain works perfectly fine.
And where, so a couple questions quickly for you, and then I'd love to give the panelists an opportunity to discuss these two projects and engage on them a little bit. But my two questions for you quickly is you made some interesting remarks about some let's say some alternative means of tokens, and what I'm hearing is a fungible and a non-fungible token pairing where you're using do I have that right? So for example, like an ERC 721 token to signal an identity that then accumulates attestations and writes to a fungible Eureka token that is the form of social capital and financial capital. Is that right? Did I get that correctly? Or
can you say this again, please?
So
what's the?
No, go ahead. Did I just interrupt?
Can you repeat? I couldn't hear properly, sir.
Oh, sorry about that. So you were describing a multiple token scenario, what I would refer to as a non-fungible and a fungible token used in a pairing where you've got some kind of identity of an individual or perhaps a study or a data element that accumulates attestations, and then you've got a fungible token that is used for social capital reward as well as financial incentive. Do I have that right?
I'm going to ask, just give me a second. So this is Lucas. He is the blockchain programmer.
Oh, hey, come on camera. Hi, Lucas.
Yeah, Lucas yeah. Sit here. And this is super technical, and I'm a neuroscientist who's more interested in revolutionizing and using it. But this is Lucas Pelloni. He works at the University of Zurich and works on the technical aspects of our platform. Lucas.
Actually, the main idea, the core idea of our token is like it's a utility token. So considering this aspect, our token will have like more utilities. So for example, you will be able to use Eureka token for funding a research project, and at the same time you will be able to use it for submitting articles.
Sure. But isn't it, so ours is not like, there are not two tokens. You could use the same kind of token for multiple purposes. So does that answer your Heather?
So Lucas, are you using an ERC 721 token in the architecture at all, or are they all ERC 20?
No, we don't have any 721. No. We don't have.
Got you.
So
okay.
you cannot trace. So it's not the traceability. It's not the traceability token. It's really just a utility token. And as soon as you publish an observation or you publish an idea, you publish a finding in Science Matters, you would have an address. You would have an Ethereum address, and then and then as soon as somebody replicates this observation, they would also have an address. And depending on the nature of the replication, you get either both of the parties get some tokens, which are Eureka tokens, or if it is a negative observation, then the replicating authors get the Eureka token. So, but we don't have any two different. Yeah.
Gotcha. That makes sense, and I understand. So we're going to be starting the audience Q&A segment soon, and we always get lots of technical questions. About half of our audience are technologists. So if you want to hang around, Lucas, it's great to have you. And I wanted to, just a quick question on ORCID from an identity perspective, and for you, Dr. van Rossum, and any comment on a token economy that you're planning on your side with blockchain for peer review.
Yeah, we're not planning any tokens. Again, our assumption is that its reputation is the currency of researchers, and so what we're trying to do is to make sure that the peer review activities are basically made reputable, that the review process becomes a measurable research output. And we believe we can do that by basically sharing the information with the right partners. ORCID is very important for us for two ways. First of all, we want to use the ORCID ID as the basis of identity. So we hope that the most reviewers will sign in with their ORCID account, and that ORCID ID will be the basis of the identity of the reviewers in the system. And second, of course, we work with ORCID because we want the reviewers to manage their own profiles, their own identities, and also, for example, manage their interest and their availability. So when a reviewer is now basically, there's no active way where a review can indicate their interest. They have to wait for an invitation. What we want to do is through their ORCID profiles that they can indicate their interest in journals and subject areas, and that the editors that are inviting the reviewers can take that into account.
And Heather, just one quick question to Joris and Lawrence, just out of interest. These tokens, whether they are qualitative social capital or actual ERC tokens, my understanding is they are only as good as the people who are in the system, who have belief in these tokens, who are who see them as valuable. So if an organization is outside the ecosystem and you want to fund the research, then you actually have to find some ways to cash out, isn't it? Because if they are not a part of the system, they won't be accepting these tokens for funding.
I mean, our hope is that funding agencies buy into Eureka tokens. So they if you want to fund a project, then you would have to belong to the ecosystem.
Okay.
I mean, as we move forward with on the funding side, of course, we cannot accept fiat currencies, but we also expect that funding agencies also change their ways of funding, and which means that they also are adopted to the ways of crypto ecosystem, right? And then we hope that this is what this is what the future will be when it comes to science funding.
All right, so I think we should get started with our audience Q&A segment. This gives us more than a half an hour of time left to engage with what I think is a really active audience. We've already got some great questions coming in, and now audience, if you haven't gotten a question articulated, this is a great time for you to submit it. So I think I'd like to take questions from Florence Hudson as our first question. Florence, I'm going to take you off of mute in just a moment and ask you to briefly introduce yourself and paraphrase your questions, because I think you've got some really interesting real life scenarios to bring to bear. Hi, Florence.
Hey, Heather, how are you today?
Great, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, and it was great listening and thinking with all of you. So I have a couple of real life examples. I like to think about strategy to execution. How do we get this started at this speed of blockchain? And so I have two examples. One is I'm actually under contract with Springer as editor-in-chief for a book that's to be published next year, and the chapters are starting to come in now. And it's called Women in Tips for IoT, which is a framework we've been creating with IEEE for a couple years on trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security for the Internet of Things, which includes medical interoperability. So, I've actually been reviewing one of the chapters today, and I was thinking, wow, how cool would it be if I could use blockchain and crowdsource a group of people, I think a curated group of people, to actually review some of this. And so that's one example. Is I actually, since Springer Nature was on your list, I think that could be interesting. And then the other idea is that I tend to be on program committees for different.
Wait, Florence, let me stop you there. Let's have everybody react to your first question, and then we'll go to your next one. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thank you, Heather.
Okay, wonderful. So regarding, I think this is really an interesting notion, getting away from necessarily the journal construct in the context of peer review and publication as the only model that is applied. Dr. van Rossum, comments on that?
Yeah, so it's great. I mean, we're working with Springer Nature, so let's get in touch after this meeting and see how we could actually collaborate. So I think we have to distinguish two things. First of all, what we are proposing in this particular phase is that we support an existing process using the blockchain, facilitating exchange of information to strengthen the existing process. I think it's another step is to improve the process itself, to change the process, as for example Lawrence has proposed. Again, our hope is that we already make great strides with improving the exchange of information. For example, it will be easier for you to invite reviewers. You will be able to see which reviewers are potentially willing and are suitable but also available to review. The reviewers will be, the acceptance rate of the reviewers will be higher because they know if they review, they get immediately the activity stored on their ORCID profiles, for example. But indeed, I mean, you could think further about using the blockchain to change the process itself, something you seem to suggest. So I would say let's get in touch and discuss. Maybe we can do something indeed practical.
That sounds wonderful. So that's our first practical opportunity. And I wrote your email down, so I'll send you an email when we're done. So there are three practical opportunities. The next one would be at the journal level, and Heather's familiar with this too, and Sean, because we're all connected to blockchain and healthcare today. And I know we've been looking at using blockchain for the peer review process for that. So perhaps that's another opportunity.
Yep. Absolutely. I think let's talk about adding a journal. Yeah.
Okay. And Sean and Heather, what do you think about that, since you've been involved with blockchain and healthcare today as well, I believe?
I think definitely, what Tori's doing there is a step in the right direction. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that. What it comes down to, I think, is looking at the tech from a user standpoint, and what is the value, what is the incentivization that is going to get them to do what you want them to do. I mean, you can crowdsource anything you want right now. I do it all the time in emails, and when I was with the federal government, I had a network of 100 or more clinical researchers. I could throw out any question, but what's their motivation to answer me? What's their motivation to put down whatever they're doing and step up and either review that chapter or do a peer review or answer my question? And sometimes that's on a personal level. If you work for a large organization, you can do that if you've got the connections and they know their input is valuable. But I think from an anonymized standpoint, or even just a crowdsourced standpoint, what's the incentive? And blockchain allows us to bring a new level of value and whether that's the tokenomics directly, or whether that's some sort of buy-in to the system that allows them to get something out of it later, by speeding up the value and the velocity are the two aspects. By speeding up the whole peer review process, maybe they don't need a token to want to help with the peer review, or want to help to review, but that's going to take a lot of education and network building before you get there. So I think you can set up a scaffolding with some sort of value to get that buy-in from a network big enough to do that crowdsourcing, or you can set up a long-term plan to get buy-in with the value that it brings to speeding up peer review, or giving the transparency. I think which Joris and the digital science team is doing, bringing more transparency to that peer review process. So one or the other is the way I think that happens, but the incentives, the value, and the velocity are key.
Very good point. And I think if you have a trusted community, like one of my other examples is going to be IEEE, then people do that for love, so to speak, right? Like they're not incentivized financially in any way. When we write publications for IT Computer Society, IEEE Computer Society's IT Professionals magazine. So I think we have to be careful about where we try to incentivize financially, because what I envision is somebody, sitting at home in their sweatsuit and then just all day, like trying to be a peer reviewer on all these things, and you create a new market, which might be okay, but then you get into, bias as well. They might try to change the way things are accepted or not. So you have to think longitudinally, I think.
And Dr. Rajendran,
I really agree with that.
Had a comment. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Dr. Rajendran, you wanted to comment.
I'm good.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Dr. van Rossum, please.
No, I really agree with that. And when we did research around peer review, and basically the majority of reviewers, they have trust in their process, and I think that they think that the way they like to do the review for two reasons. First of all, because they feel it's an obligation to other researchers, because their research gets reviewed as well, and second, because they can keep up to date about recent research. So the problem with review is really the pressure, the lack of recognition, being sent too many requests from editors. So, and again, I think when you start to introduce new incentives, then you also have the risk to disrupt the system, which in itself works quite well, despite all the challenges that we see. So I agree, we have to take care with introducing tokens that might, create a whole new dynamic, might have, results that you don't expect and you don't want.
Agreed. And then the other one that we'll chat about when we talk is another workshop I'm on the program committee for, called Computational Approaches for Cancer, that we do at the Supercomputing Conference every year. And it's an interesting goal there because we're bringing communities together, since we know we definitely don't know enough about cancer because we haven't been able to stop it or prevent it. We're bringing Department of Energy algorithmic leaders together with NCI, National Cancer Institute people, to try to bring new thinking. And so there are papers that come into that too, and it's actually a confluence of multiple communities. It's cancer researchers, it's Department of Energy researchers, it's high energy physicists, different crowds. And so as you think about the different elements of a blockchain, when I think of blockchain, I think of a hybrid blockchain where there could be almost like the Olympic circles that kind of overlap but not all the way. There could be different communities that come together in new ways. That could be another interesting topic where there are researchers involved, and I'd love to get some more smart people. Y'all are smart, and a lot of smart people, but even more smart people trying this stuff out.
Yeah, actually, that brings me to a point of Lawrence, and I think that the danger is capturing more information, just alongside the narrative of the article, capturing more data. The challenge is that you get too much noise. So I think we need a lot of smart algorithms and a lot of smart people to make sense out of the data. So I think that's a step that has to go alongside capturing more data.
Excellent point.
Very quickly jump in and follow on the last point. I think that was an excellent point, that today, for example, when we have to solve a problem, and cancer is a wonderful example, that you have to bring in not just oncologists or not just biologists or not just physicians, but you have to have different stakeholders when it comes to evaluating either a proposal or a paper these days. It often has interdisciplinary aspects of it. But today what happens is that we send it to 2 reviewers. I've been an editor-in-chief, and if you look at any scientific journal, then you send it to 2 or 3 reviewers, and they often are pretty much in the same field. But now imagine, and so we get a very myopic view based on their expertise. It's very limited expertise, and I think with blockchain in a decentralized way, and imagine you get a crowdsourced way of different evaluation responses. I think this could enable much better. And you will read in the Eureka white paper, for papers we do, and papers and also funding proposals, we use 2 different levels of peer reviewers. One is kind of a technical expert peer review, and we call this as an expert peer review. And the second one is the impact peer review. So we often bring in people who are from patient community, physicians, caregivers, to even have their input, as opposed to just having only researchers evaluating. This is the status quo. We often send it to researchers to evaluate. If I'm a cell biologist and I work on Alzheimer's disease, I'm supposed to know how it is going to affect the patient. But imagine we do a hybrid model of it, and blockchain would absolutely enable involving both the technical expertise, expert review community, peer review community, as well as impact community, right? And I think in this way we could have a weighted view on proposal, weighted scores, and that could have much more, in my view, much more impact and much more translatability, as opposed to having only a pure academic peer evaluation of papers and proposals. So I agree with you on the last point, clearly.
I think I just want to make one comment. I spent a lot of time educating students at the university, giving lectures, workshops on research about blockchain, and I think there's this misconception out there that you need to be a computer scientist, programmer only to do research, write, build apps and have those sort of kind of background in programming and really hardcore computer work. Lawrence mentioned about the next step after you have built an application is what is the impact of it, and I think there is severe shortage of evidence-based resources in this area. So, for example, the practical applications of blockchain, so in terms of economy, governance, regulation, social impact of that application, these are all research topics. So if you are a student in finance, in law, in commerce, in sociology, don't just think that the blockchain research is just about the blockchain aspect, the programming aspect of the research. It's about the whole, the way of life, the entire socio economy.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your very thoughtful comments. I really appreciate it. And Heather, thank you for bringing this great crowd together. And Joris, I'm going to be in touch.
Great. Looking forward.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I'm going to put you back on mute. I appreciate your participation. All right. Yeah, it's really, really fantastic comments on the connection between measuring impact and widening the aperture of stakeholders to science and being able to measure that. That's fantastic. And also the discussion about having a more broadly interdisciplinary perspective as we're looking to make discoveries and advance the field is just really, really valuable. Thank you for that. So our next questioner is Ruth Amos. Ruth, I'm going to take you off of mute here in 3, 2, 1. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Heather.
Very welcome. Would you please just quickly introduce yourself before you jump in your question?
Oh, sure. I'm Ruth Amos, and I am currently CEO of a small advisory firm called Practical Informatics. My background has been in digital healthcare with Kaiser Permanente and Ernst & Young. And I'm interested in blockchain in healthcare, not so much have experience with scientific publishing, but I think that, in terms of how things get to the forefront and get noticed in science is very important in terms of how we view innovation and who gets seen or who gets noticed. So that's of great interest to me.
All right, and you had a question about how to get buy-in for change for this process. Clearly, those of us on this panel today are already completely bought in and highly engaged. I think, is that what getting to the heart of it is? How are we going to get the word out amongst all of these participants
exactly
to around the world?
Yes, I think the first speaker said it very nicely, that there are two ends of the spectrum. The people who are very excited about what blockchain potential is, and then the people who are very skeptical. In terms of what's been driving this out of control peer review process, and kind of why it's gotten to where it is, I think one of the speakers alluded to the fact that science is becoming more of a profession, and that's a great start. I guess in terms of the storytelling piece that one of the speakers mentioned, how would blockchain potentially change that requirement in terms of peer review? Or would people just still be telling stories by habit, or thinking they need to get to that level before they even submit something?
Who would like to take that one first? I think so. So how does creating a blockchain ecosystem break down the process of having to have a complete narrative constructed prior to getting published in a high impact journal?
Exactly. I mean, I think people get used to doing things a certain way, even if it doesn't make sense, because they're so used to it being a requirement that even if you tell them they don't have to do that anymore, it takes time to really adjust to a new paradigm and a new way of thinking in terms of driving change to a level of acceptability. So any of the speakers, I'd love to hear your comments on that.
I think that's a very important point, which also goes towards behavior. It goes towards the psyche of scientists. We are, in a way, you're right. So we are storytellers, and we wait until a narrative can be told. And I don't know whether, with Science Matters, we try to change the way science publishing is done. As soon as you have these observations, you could just put them together, and then you can make the narrative online as you go. Will blockchain, the enablement of blockchain, would it change? I think the only way it will change is that if you are working on a problem and you spend like 3 years developing a narrative, let's say this is what we do, so we make a fantastic discovery, and then we try to bring these additional elements for the sake of narrative and to tell the whole story. And imagine now there is another researcher that publishes that core observation that you found 3 years ago, right? And you're now keeping this for yourself, and then you're just trying to build this narrative. But now imagine a part of that study is, or like this core observation, there's a guy or another researcher just puts it out there and gets the credit because they are they now publish that first observation from their side. And this kind of what we call as a scooping, this could this could make the other researcher say, why did I wait for 3 years into making this observation into a narrative? Then somebody else publishes part of the observation, and we see this all the time, right? This scooping of scientific publication. I think in this way, one will say, I'm going to put out my observations as well. And I think this could change the way that we do science and we publish, and narratives could become It's more of a collaborative way of telling the narrative as opposed to an author-pruned version of it, and that takes not only time and energy and different resources, but also has this high degree of scooping possibility. As soon as there would be a platform where you could just publish these observations, I think that would be a way to do.
No, thank you. I think, you know, the change will come, maybe with some deliberate instigation, is what I'm thinking. some people who actually collaborate on purpose to bring about some of these challenges in terms of you know, the next level, and setting the expectation and how to govern that.
And, you know, I'd love to hear you comment on this question, Dr. Mannion, with respect to driving awareness among the stakeholders. And if you think what tiny percentage of practicing scientists around the world have any knowledge of blockchain or these systems or these potentials, yet bringing that engagement to the table and building that network and momentum and mass is critical even for us to validate any of the hypotheses that have been put forward. So I know you're doing a lot of work in that space. Any comments in that area?
Well, I'll go back to, you know, for both that comment and Ruth's question. You know, we're humans. We like stories. Stories. You know, this is something Samson Williams likes to bring upon us all. Is we like stories, and that's how we understand things. And as scientists scaled beyond just dealing with scientists and had to deal with funders and the general public, stories became that much more important. So putting what you do into those stories, having a framework, having a life's work, it becomes much more important. And so I think what blockchain can bring to that in the long run is if you can bypass that scoopability issue, you can speed things up, as Lauren said, if you can capture the IP, the intellectual property aspect of all of the different data as it's collected. So before you even get to the publication, there's contribution that's tracked, and that I think will require a culture change, but something that becomes technologically and humanly possible with the longitudinal auditable record that blockchain brings. So on the first part of the storytelling and will that change? I think it will eventually change. I think you'll still wrap stories around it, but it won't be required for publishing once everybody can have their contributions tracked throughout the process of putting something together. I think stepping back and going from a meta perspective on telling the story of blockchain to scientists, not only do not a lot of them know about it, a lot of them reject it outright. I've had some fascinating conversations about they don't want to hear about it until it's up and running. At the same time, it brings value that they don't quite understand. It's written, you know, in its language by the fintech, by the financial world. And so even before, when we were talking about coins and tokens and having an incentive for reputation that's called a token might be misinterpreted. So maybe you call it an award. If I receive, you know, six Eureka tokens and 7 mini Nobels or nano Nobels for the work that I did, maybe that's the type of incentive that would work. And so I think understanding what language to bring that to the scientists is important, because if you bring it in financial language, scientists often reject financial incentives outright. Yeah, they want a paycheck. I spent 2 years out of 7 in grad school not getting paid. I stayed there because it was good for my career, but the bottom line is there are other incentive systems besides that. And if you put a financial moniker to it, a lot of them run away. So you may need to find a way of telling the story, telling the value in addition to the monetary incentives itself, and without using that type of language. Maybe coin and token isn't going to give you penetration in the science world, but maybe a different term will be. But there's a lot of storytelling that's necessary for to science and from science.
That's interesting, because it's almost like the very storytelling we're trying to kind of curb in the peer review process is going to probably be required for incentivization.
But what, you know, to the point Dr. Rajendran made, we have a new model of crowdsourced narratives with micro contributions. And Dr. Mannion, nano Nobels, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think you're right. Getting to the heart of what actually resonates with people in terms of reward and behavioral change is I think what tends to drive the best change overall.
Yep, and words matter. Words matter, and that we cannot forget that we're not only talking about reputational or social capital and financial reward, but altruism and contribution are among the highest and most lasting human motivators. So that's a terrific point. So just a quick, I'd love to hear like lightning round answer from Dr. Van Rossum and Dr. Rajendran about how you're going to get the word out about the Eureka model and how you're going to get the word out about blockchain for peer review. And is it time for that yet, or are you still building? So Dr. Van Rossum, if you could just quickly on that, and then Dr. Rajendran.
Well, I think for us it's a bit more easy. I think no reviewer, no editor, no researcher has to know about blockchain. They shouldn't have any idea that blockchain, it's an underlying technology that makes an existing process more efficient, that allows them to get reputation faster and more reliable, and allows information to be shared. But again, it's the technology under the hood. It doesn't require any behavioral change. It just makes things easier and faster. So we don't have to explain anything. We have to explain the publishers, of course. And I think we have been quite successful in that, explaining why this would help. By building a community effort, making the process better will benefit all participants in the ecosystem. But again, our blockchain system is not changing behavior, it's improving the existing system. And I guess the question is really relevant when you want to build a new system. I think that's indeed when, the question of explaining becomes more relevant.
Thank you, Dr. Van Rossum.
By the way, one suggestion, maybe we should call it bit Nobels. Maybe that's another name.
Cute. Dr. Rajendran.
I'm so happy to hear how optimistic Joris is. I think part of the optimism comes from the fact that Joris is a wonderful guy and he's been in the field for a while, but I think it's also so I understand this. I've been in the scientific community for a long time, and there is a huge amount of skepticism on the blockchain aspect of it. Even if they wouldn't understand it, even if the scientists wouldn't need to essentially understand the technology behind it, but to adopt something, we are very, very slow. So I'm not that optimistic, but the optimistic in terms of time of adoption. I think scientist community, we often know that though we develop technology and tools, we are often the last people to have email addresses. And I often think that if you think about a crypto wallet, and when I talk about the possibility, if you're a researcher, it need not necessarily be that you just get only citations and names in the reference list, but now there could be a possibility to get a wallet, and you could have a bit Nobel or like a little bit of Eureka. And often they say, what is this technology? What is this crypto wallet? What is this? And the only thing I can think of is that I think we are at a stage where email addresses were given to people, right? I don't know if you're old enough to understand that time when all that you had was a crystal clear address.
Yeah.
And then we had pen pals writing to people, peer-to-peer communications, which was about pen pal. And then suddenly came this idea. I mean, email is also peer-to-peer communication. This idea came that you could now use internet to send messages, and I think we are pretty much at this level. It's starting. It will take a long time and we will reach the stage where everyone will carry a wallet, and need not necessarily be that I'm offended that you want to financially incentivize me because I'm a researcher and I'm a philosopher, but it will happen one day. And so the way that we are trying to do the Eureka and the way that we try to leverage blockchain technology is really to have it as a side service. So Science Matters will exist off blockchain, and if you don't have the technology and if you don't want to be a part of the blockchain technology, you still can publish single observations and make these narratives in the collaborative way off chain. But we will side by side provide Eureka on the side to feature how it is when you enable technology. And I think once you have this, once you know how to write letters on a paper, or you also give them an email address and say, this is also a different mode of communication. this is how we plan to do. And so we will launch this ICO, this initial coin offering, sometime in September. So the pre-sale will already happen in August. And so we hope that people read about it, that this is not going to be like, completely transformative from one day to the other. This will be an organic, slow process, because we understand that scientists are pretty skeptical, but at the same time, healthy skeptic. And these things should also take time, because we still don't understand if we will ever fail by adopting entirely blockchain technology. And we haven't done that experiment yet. And as a result, we want to go hand in hand, having a publishing portal that will be off-chain and a new and efficient model, but it will still be an experiment. Eureka will be an experiment, and I would love for people to participate so that we would understand what the outcome of this experiment will be in a couple of years.
And it just underscores how important it is that while that is happening, we are also conducting the meta science and studying how it's happening, and contributing to the publications such as the Journal of British Blockchain Association, Blockchain in Healthcare Today, and other journals that are looking at how it's happening at the meta level. Absolutely fantastic. So I think we have time for one more question from the audience. This question's really insightful, but it gets to the heart of replicability and how you know whether something has been replicated. And I'm going to take Patrick Joyce off of mute here in just a moment. In 3, 2, 1. And by the way, thank you, Ruth. Also, I'm sorry I didn't thank you for the contribution. So Patrick, hello.
Hi, Heather. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. This has been a fascinating discussion.
You're very welcome.
I think what I'm really curious about is pretty much everyone discussed replicability during their initial presentations, and Dr. Mannion saying that you could essentially double the funding agency's budget. I think that's really potentially massively impactful. Unfortunately, I think it sounds really good from a 10,000-foot view, but when you talk about replication, that's a kind of subjective process. Science is very complicated. If you have an fMRI that is replicated, how can you objectively determine if a new observation replicates the original one in a fair and, I guess, repeatable manner?
And you said in your question also, Patrick, how, for example, is it completely binary, or is there an uncertainty factor or a variance model? And would you mind just quickly introducing yourself before we let the panelists react?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. I'm a medical student here in the States, and I also founded a blockchain for science company that's addressing some of these same issues that you all are.
Oh, exciting. What company is that?
CoLab. The idea is actually kind of similar to Dr. Rajendran's. It's using the scientific method in order to publish experimental observations, questions, and hypotheses.
What is it called?
CoLab? I'll reach out to you afterwards. We should.
Please, yeah, please. It would be lovely to collaborate.
Sure.
All right, so thoughts on the epistemological basis of whether we know something has been replicated. Who'd like to take that one first?
I can jump in. And Patrick, good to talk to you again. Patrick was at Georgetown with us, Heather. I don't know if you got a chance to meet him, but
I thought his voice sounded familiar.
So I think it's definitely a scale. I think it's a confidence level scale. There is no absolute replicability, but doing an experiment and then doing that experiment again and having that replicability, that reliability that you're going to get within the same range of results is something that we're missing too often right now in science. And I think what blockchain allows for is much more openness and transparency and auditability in what went into each experiment. And to some degree, it's going to take collecting more detail than was there before. The practice-based evidence approach to science, where you collect a lot more detail, not just about the type of intervention for a patient, but also details about the person who delivered that intervention. Were they a physical therapist or were they a speech language pathologist? Because they might do things differently. That's key for replication, and any type of replication. The more data that you can get on the methodology, the more someone else is going to be able to either reproduce it or that individuals can replicate their own science. So I think it's going to be a matter of degree of improvement rather than absolute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more studies you have in the meta-analysis, the more confident you are in your findings. Absolutely.
I like what Heather said, the epistemology of the way we do science. It's like the science of science, right? Okay, how does technology change the way we do science? I think, and to your question, I think we need to think of reproducibility not as one general term, like, you know, I think it's a super heterogeneous term, which will include either you try to replicate exactly with the same method, or if it's a code, if you have the same code and then you get the same result, or if it's a different code or different methodology or different cell system and you get pretty much the same. So I kind of think of it as a spectrum that comes from that goes from replicability, where it's like you replicate exactly using the same method and you expect the same result, or reproducibility, which changes the way as soon as you would change methodologies and different code, and then you get something. And then there is robust results. Like no matter which cohort you look at, the drug has this effect, right? And that's like the real robustness of reproducibility. And then the fourth thing is more of a generalizability, right? Like, you know, could you generalize the findings and the concept? Can it be generalized? So I don't think that replication necessarily means replicating exactly with the same method and expecting the same result, but it varies both at the level of the agent as well as at the like the way that we would change the tools for investigation, and we also it also changes on the results and the product that we expect. So I guess in that way, you know, I think this is a part of a confusion. People often say if there is a replication crisis, it has to come from fraudulence in science, but need not necessarily be. It is a different cohort. The antibody was a different. There was a different a lot of the antibody that you used. The technique was different. And so I consider reproducibility as more of an umbrella term as opposed to a very strict one-on-one reproduction.
Dr. Rajendran, I really love the point you made about generalizability as being on that continuum. That's definitely going to have my wheels turning, thinking about some of the things that, you know, many of us are working on in this.
I have to acknowledge this. She's Kirsten from Alan Turing Institute in London. She is one of the experts in defining different aspects of reproducibility, and so it's her way of defining it that I quoted. So I want to acknowledge the right source.
Thank you. Maybe you'd be willing to make an introduction. Would love to dig into that and gain you know, become familiar with that body of knowledge. Thank you. So as often happens in these events, we are out of time in what feels like a blink of an eye, despite it being a two-hour segment on a topic. I'm going to put you back on mute, Patrick. Thank you very much for the excellent question, and I'm glad that we got to take the discussion to replicability right here at the close. So thank you for that.
Thank you too. The great answers. I'm really looking forward to seeing these solutions in practice.
Thanks. All right, so I have a couple of announcements to make quickly, and then I'll be inviting each of the panelists to make closing remarks, and we will wrap. The first announcement is a new organization that is launching next month called Blockchain and Healthcare Global. You can find announcements for it later in the month of July on LinkedIn, but in the meantime, it is a 501c6 trade association nonprofit organized around addressing the barriers to adoption to blockchain in healthcare delivery and the health, life, and social sciences. lots more to come on that. And it's organized under the IEEE ISTO. So hoping to collaborate with all of you panelists on that, especially you, Dr. Mannion. We've been working on it closely. And then I wanted to bring everyone's attention to upcoming events in this series that are already scheduled, and we've got another dozen or more in different stages of production. But next week we have a session on blockchain security for genomic data with encryption. On July 3rd, we have Simply Vital Health and the Health Nexus blockchain. On the 18th of July, there's an event that I think all of the panelists today will be greatly interested in. It's the ethical design framework for blockchain developed by Carl Lapointe. And we are working on building a health and life sciences manifestation or deepening of that's vertically specific. So that intersection of ethics and all that you're doing to advance science might be something you're very interested in. On the 1st of August, we have an investor perspective on blockchain and healthcare, where we have a panel of investors, angel, institutional, fund level, a whole spectrum, where we're going to dig into capital formation and funding models to drive the advancement of blockchain in health and life sciences. And then on the 9th, we have another company from the UK called Look Health that's focused on a blockchain approach to preventative medicine and preventative healthcare. And there's many more coming. So thank you to a great audience. I appreciate you all being here, and I'll now invite the panelists to make closing remarks. So let's start with you, Dr. van Rossum.
Yeah, I think this has been great. I think part of the journey is starting our own initiatives and trying things out. But another part is certainly having discussions like this. So I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. So let's continue the conversation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. Dr. Mannion.
I'll just say that it's a new technology. It's a new application of a business process, and science is more complex than finance data. So I think the people who are involved in technology need to talk with scientists, and the scientists need to understand the technology and work together to get it inroads within science.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Mannion. Appreciate you being here. And Dr. Naqvi.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a great webinar. I would just say that if you are a student, a scholar, researcher looking to write up, do research or trying to understand the technology or demystify this new technology, then I'm happy to help. If you're planning to write up a case report or a research project or want to publish something, then please get in touch.
Thank you, Dr. Naqvi. Really appreciate your time today, and excited about the Journal of the British Blockchain Association as well. And
I'll send you the copy. First edition is coming out next month, so I'll send you the hard copy as well.
Thank you so much.
I'll send all of you a hard copy, actually.
That's big. Actual wood pulp, real paper. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Dr. Rajendran.
Hi, thank you so much for organizing this webinar. I think it's an exciting time even. So I try to consider this era that we are in is like, somebody who we witnessed the before blockchain era, and now we're witnessing the after blockchain era. And we all noted how inefficient the system is currently in terms of scientific publishing and the reproducibility crisis, and how this could have led to the delay in finding cures, for example, or like drug validation of drug targets. Now we all propose that blockchain can change this, right? And we all think that this will make this efficient. And I think this would be wonderful to have it as an academic exercise, not necessarily as one of those, we shouldn't think that this is going to solve our problems and this is the new messiah in the block, but really this is something, for me, it's like an academic exercise. Now we should really invest into this technology and try to figure out by implementing much better. And also, Naveen, you said about governance, and I think if it is regulated, if it is governed, if it is done well, I'm pretty sure we will have this answer whether this technology indeed keeps us promise. And until this time, I think we should all carry a healthy dose of skepticism, but at the same time, be optimistic about this technology. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, Dr. Rajendran. Really appreciated your contributions today. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and look forward to seeing all of you in the audience next time. And thanks to all of our terrific panelists today. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.